Hi everyone, my name is Zina Ahmed, and today I'm going to be presenting on shipbreaking wasteland, more specifically in Alang, India. What we can see here on this image is sort of just a vast wasteland and a graveyard of shipbreaking. So what exactly is shipbreaking? Um, Shipbreaking is just a process of ship disposal that essentially breaks apart, these individuals break apart the ship, as you can see in this image. And again, I'm going to sort of dive into, a little bit more on the context in the next slide. But just to give you an overview as to what shipbreaking is, it's, individuals who are working on these ship graveyard sites who just break apart these humongous ships. They could be oil tankers, fishing vessels, and they sort of haul them to these graveyards and then scrap whatever valuable materials, that's in the ship. So just to give you a sort of an overview as to what we're going to discuss today, we're going to talk about the environmental issues. We're also going to talk about the countries that contribute to shipbreaking in Gujarat, India, which is also a province in which Alang is a part of. And then as well as the final destinations of these vessels. So, and I'll dive into that. I don't want to give any spoilers. And then the yearly trends in which we're going to observe these shipbreaking and the frequency of it, as well as the impact on the environment. And you'll notice that along the way, I'll talk about just the overview of the economy, the environment, and just the social burdens in which these individuals have. So just to give you an overview as to where Alang India is. Obviously, it's in India, and it's a very small coastal city or region in Gujarat, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a small region there. And currently, it's one of the largest shipbreaking sites in the world. The government itself has contributed a lot of land to Alang in order to continue to contribute to the shipbreaking industry. Now, with that being said, there are risks involved, such as fatality risk, pollutions, obviously, with dismantling such a large vessel as we can see here. We can see in this photograph that as you're breaking apart the ship, right, you're going to have rust, you're going to have material fall off, and all of that, of course, is going into the water. So, how exactly are these ships, I guess, being imported onto these beaches? And so it takes a lot to plan too. So a lot of it is based on tidal waves. A lot of it is based on making sure that the boat itself is on high tide. And once it's on high tide, right, they sort of leave it there and allow the individuals, the workers, tug it to sort of the muddy regions. And then once that's done, they will then again just sort of like disintegrate that part, not disintegrate, I'm sorry, wait until the tide is low and then they'll sort of pull, in which we can see in the very first picture, that's sort of what occurs. Now, again, these impacts are severe in the overall view of just the industry, the country, and the individuals. So we're going to talk about which countries contribute to Alang. So as you guys can see here, right, this is sort of what I've sort of created is just an overview, right? We see just the global Earth. We see sort of a little bit of which countries are being presented. So you would imagine that we would have we would specifically have these Southeast Asian countries being tailored to it, but um, it's not, right? And you can see here that I've sort of broken it down as to which countries are in fact contributing to these shipbreaking, right? Which of these vessels are being registered to these countries? So Belgium is one, right? China is another one. We see South Korea, we see Greece, Brazil, Denmark, France, Germany. And so all of these countries again contribute to so Guret, this is it that's highlighted in this like teal color. And this is the country of India. And so along is somewhere around this coastal region, right? So what we're trying to do is trying to just understand the environmental cause, right? Trying to understand how does all of these countries that we listed, Brazil, France, right? How do they all wind up here? And again, we can imagine just the sludge that's being piled up, how old these vessels are. I think in one of the documentation and the data they had just in the last year that was released, a vessel coming from Russia. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. But that vessel it was a fishing vessel that came from Russia that landed, or I should say, that was last destination in Alang, India, and it was predated 1970. I'm sorry, 1967. So it's one of those things where we have to take into account these very old vessels, the material in which they're in, the lead, the paint, and everything else. But again, we'll talk about that. So this sort of elaborates a little bit more as to which countries participate in shipbreaking. I know that the primary focus was just India and Alang, but I sort of want to show you guys just an overview as to who exactly are the key players into shipbreaking and why that's of importance. We can see that, here the United States, the UK are often regulated and have huge regulations. One in the United States with OSHA. We know that OSHA particularly has very harsh regulations as to, proper PPEs and ensuring that these labor workers are protected, they're wearing masks, right? They're wearing hard hats, because again, these individuals are dealing with very harsh and very heavy chemicals. Not only that, but they're also dealing with hazardous and non-hazardous waste. So we're not surprised that we can see, these majority of the countries, which are low, medium income countries. So Bangladesh is one, India is one, and Pakistan is another. And then we can see that Turkey and Pakistan are roughly close. And again, this data is in reference to the data set that I got. And again, just to bring that, a little bit closer or visually appealing, right? We can see it here that it's about 32%. So India is about a third of this industry that participates in shipbreaking. And that's a lot, right? So can you imagine, throughout the world, all of the ships just arriving at sort of the beachfront of along India, and to constantly have to dismantle it, be quick, right? Be efficient, because there's a next vessel coming, there's a next vessel coming, there's a next vessel coming. And again, unfortunately, we see a lot when it comes to labors. Because these countries are outsourcing. So if we go back, these countries are essentially outsourcing, the dismantling to India. And the reason being is that, we can tell that one, the cost is inexpensive, it doesn't take that much. And then two, right, we understand that it takes a lot to get rid of the toxic materials that may be found on ships. So it's best to just outsource it to someone else for cheaper labor. Not to say that that's best, but this is the mindset of sort of these countries. So what we're looking at right now is, just it's again just to dive into, these main countries that I've pointed out, right? And who are the key players. And in essence, who exactly is dismantling, these large ships. So if you can see here again, I've pointed out, the same um, boat that I included in the beginning of the PowerPoint. And just to show you guys too, right? Um, it's sort of one of these things where, oops, if I can get my mouse. Oh, I wanted. Sorry. So it's just to show you guys again, just the overview of what gross tonnage is. So these vessels, and you can see that this data was done in, I'd say, about 2004. So it just gave us an overview as to how many ships did India have in that year, Bangladesh, China, and Pakistan. And overall, we can see that, um, sorry, we can see that it is in fact just higher than everyone else. And everyone, I mean, in other countries. The difference is that we see in Bangladesh something called the gross tonnage. So the gross tonnage is just calculated as the ship itself, the vessel, and sort of the volume in which it can carry. So basically, the volume of the entire ship, right, and how much it can carry, and the space that it has. So these vessels and the total amount of it, right, it signifies a lot because we're saying that ultimately you have a lot of space. You have these vessels that can carry a lot. And so with that, you're going to have whatever, material left over that could have been left over and not cleaned up properly being left on those ships. So we may not know exactly what's going on, and at the same time, right, we sort of can just understand the risks that come with it. So you have these chains, you have these anchors, you have the rust, right? You have these individuals who are working, and then you sort of have again just the paint itself, like you can see the rust that's on the boat. So this is an interesting trend. We see that, prior in 1982, specifically in Alang, India, right, that it starts out very low. And that's sort of where shipbreaking was introduced. So we can see that it's gradually increasing up until 1992. And then from 92, we can see that it sort of divots, or it stays, I would say, almost stagnant from 92. Not stagnant completely. Obviously, we see a little dip, in 92 and 94, but then it increases again and it sort of stays there up until, the early 2000s. And then we see that it really drops all the way down in 2008. Now, the reason why we see that huge dip is because of the global crisis. There was a global crisis in 2008, and it was more pertaining to the global economic crisis, and that sort of halted everything in the shipbreaking industry. So we had a huge amount of vessels prior, about 350, close to 400, but in 2008, again, it went almost down to like 50. But then shortly after, we can see that it skyrocketed. And again, we can tell from just prior data sets in which we're looking at that Along is one of those industries, or cities, I should say, in which it's really thriving, and we can see the skyrocket of it. So now that we've sort of understood the complexities, right, of which why along India has prevailed and succeeded, right? What are now sort of the harmful effects, and um, how can it just affect, India overall? So we can tell that, if we're looking at the seawater quality, right, obviously we're going to find a lot of heavy metals found on the seabed. Now, again, remember what I said earlier, or I'm sorry, remember what I stated earlier in the earlier slides, right? These boats have to come to the shoreline. And in order to do so, you're talking about, we can see in the very earlier pictures, right, a lot of the rust on those boats. So obviously, we're going to see a lot of heavy materials that is found on the seabed. Now, with the next part in regards to soil quality, there are reportings that say that they don't find anything, right? That nothing has been contaminated, that the soil is perfectly fine. However, that's false. The Greenpeace study found that, and they tested the soil, found that the soil along was contaminated with aromatic hydrocarbons, right, from the combustion process. So remember, in order to break apart and recycle the ships, there's a lot of combustion that comes into play. So a lot of these valuable materials, such as steel and wood, are being recovered and reused. So we have to go through this combustion process, and unfortunately, that's being done right at the surface of the ground. And then if we see groundwater and surface water, right, there are articles that state that although the rainfall is light, right, there is no pollutants found. However, we've known that it can cause any flooding, any just bad weather for the pollutants to easily seep into the groundwater, right, and sort of demolish that environment. And the issue here too is that along India is at the Gulf of Cambay. So Cambay sort of goes into these two rivers, and then that goes into cities. So if the pollutants are seeping through, then a lot of individuals are affected. And so, we're talking about pollutants, and toxic materials such as asbestos, right? We're also talking about non-polymer chemicals, so things that you can find on air conditioners, engines. We're also talking about heavy metals, things that you can find in batteries, paints, and again, hazardous materials, right? And other non-hazardous like waste. So you can imagine that all of that stuff, if leaked, right, and if found on sort of the soil, and it seeps through, it can quite easily go into the city and infect everyone. The air quality, a lot of people have stated that, again, same thing with the soil quality, that there was nothing, no chemicals found. However, again, within this green space study, they did in fact find asbestos. And then this sort of brings me to my next point. So interesting enough, I was curious about the longevity for these workers, and we've come to find that unfortunately, the life expectancy of these individuals, of these shipbreakers, tend to live up to 45 years. So what does that mean? That means that one, they have poor life expectancy, right? Because when compared to the longevity in just, for Indians, it's roughly 56 to 70 years of age. So we're talking about huge significance in life expectancy. And the reason being is that these individuals are affected by asbestos. So to conclude, um, you know, in 1983, the Alang beaches were sort of opened up for business, and shipbreaking began for these areas, and sort of the shipbreaking allowed for individuals to recycle parts and materials of the vessels and the boats. We can see in this sort of picture how that process is being done. And again, remember what I said about combustion and those chemicals seeping through, right? We see that this individual, yes, he's wearing a hard hat. Yes, there are regulations in India pertaining to, individuals being safe. However, they're not wearing any mask, right? They're not wearing sort of these protective gears to prevent them from inhaling these poor air pollutants. So, shipbreaking has been outsourced to Alang due to the inexpensive labor. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is that these individuals are paid at a very low rate. A lot of these a lot of these I'm going to keep repeating myself. I'm sorry. A lot of these ship breaking laborers will work for anywhere between $5 to $10 US dollars, and that's sort of their salary. So on a monthly basis. So obviously, that's a lot of um, that's not a lot at all for them to fend for their family, for them to provide, and to just sustain livability. So we can see that India has dominated the shipbreaking industry. However, there's still a lot to come with shipbreaking and just, preventing sort of these harmful effects on not just on the environment, but on human beings. These are the references in which I've used, and thank you.